Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 58. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we have a bunch of mons here that would probably be picked last if you are building a Trick Room team. Now, all of these Pokemon have uses on Trick Room teams, don't get me wrong, it's just that whenever you are building a Trick Room team, you're probably not grabbing one of these unless you are expecting a very specific niche scenario. And it's because of those scenarios that these Pokemon mostly have like better answers for other Trick Room Pokemon, but let's get into that here. First off, we have Rampardos, and Rampardos is really strong in the physical attack department. It's just kind of stinks in the fact that it has basically no defenses, but at least like a decent HP stat. But the HP stat just means that you're going to give your opponent more Drain Punch HP. But with Trick Room, we can change that, as Rampardos is pretty slow. It's not like the slowest thing in the world to be putting in Trick Room, but you're still pretty slow. And Rampardos is a decent attacker because it can also boost its moves with its Sheer Force ability, which means that we will nullify the secondary effects of our moves in order to increase them by 1.3 times power, which means that we're going to be boosting Rock Slide because we won't be flinching anymore. We're going to be boosting Crunch because we won't be getting a defense drop anymore, and we're going to be boosting Iron Head because Iron Head isn't going to be flinching anymore. And we're going to have Clear Amulet on Rampardos so that we're not getting our attack lowered by Intimidate, and we're going to be Tart Ghost so that we're not catching any fake outs, but also Ghost makes us immune to fighting type moves that we were previously weak to. Up next we got Snorlax, and Snorlax is probably the most popular Pokemon in this group, as Snorlax still has a lot of utility outside of Trick Room teams, but if you're building a Trick Room team, you're probably more often than not just grabbing Guts or Saluna. But Snorlax is still not so bad, as we have the Body Slam and the High Horsepower in order to do our stab damage and also our type coverage damage to hit things like Steel and Rock types, and we have the Belly Drum in order to max our attack, hopefully on the very first turn, and then Trick Room goes up and then we can just have Snorlax sweep the entire game. And with Belly Drum, we have a way to negate the HP that we lose because we are Agua Berry, which means that we will restore a third of our health whenever we're at a fourth of our health. However, with the Gluttony ability, we will restore that third of our health from our berry immediately when we hit the half health. And since Belly Drum brings us down to half health, it means that we only lose a very, very small amount of our HP when clicking the Belly Drum. We're also Terra Water on Snorlax just because water gives us a lot of good resistances. Next up we got Closetser, and Closetser is a real powerhouse Pokemon because of its ability Mega Launcher, which basically gives you a Choice Specs boost on top of all of the Pulse moves, and we even have Choice Specs to further boost the damage of our special attacks. So we loaded up the Closetser with 4 different Pulse attacks in the Water Pulse, the Dark Pulse, the Aura Sphere, which is a Pulse move, but it just doesn't end in Pulse, and we have the Dragon Pulse as our last Pulse. I also gave Closetser Dark Pulse because I wanted it to get good Dark type stab on its Dark Pulse, since Dark Pulse is the move that can hit pretty much everything on Closetser. Even like the neutral hits from the Dark Pulse have a pretty good chance to just OHKO opposing Pokemon, and also Dark is nice for being immune to like Expanding Force on opposing Trick Room teams. Up next we have our first actual Trick Room setter, and we're going to be using Reuniclus, and this Reuniclus set is mostly designed to be a support. Like, we do have the Psychic for a little bit of damage there, but we also have the Trick option in order to get rid of our item, and we are holding the Toxic Orb, which will cause the opponent to get poisoned at the end of the turn that they are holding Toxic Orb, so hopefully we can trick them a Toxic Orb and steal their good item while also causing them to be poisoned. And a much better use of this set would be to be Flame Orb. However, I put Toxic Orb on here just because we have 3 very offensive opponents. It might be better to break the more defensive stall Pokemon, so we have Toxic Orb, but I could definitely see Flame Orb on this set in order to burn physical attackers and steal their items. But we don't have to worry about poisoning ourselves, as we are Magic Guard, which means that we will not be taking any Toxic Orb poison damage, and sometimes we can just protect with Reuniclus in order to Toxic Poison ourselves, so that way we will be not able to be like put to sleep or Thunder Waved or anything like that. And I'm really not quite sure why I put Terra Flying on Reuniclus. I think it's because I expected to have Earthquake on Snorlax, but then I got rid of Earthquake once I just didn't put any more Pokemon on this team that could deal with the Earthquake, and now we have high horsepower in Snorlax. So Terra Flying is... there's probably a better Terra here, but we're just going to use Terra Flying. Up next, we got Mimikyu, who wouldn't look like a Trick Room Pokemon, as when you think of Mimikyu, you tend to think of like Swords Dance and then fast offense damage, since you have the Disguise to give you that one turn of getting up the Swords Dance. Since what Mimikyu's Disguise does, it means that you can always take a hit as long as it's like not a sound type move, because technically you have a substitute up with Mimikyu. But Mimikyu is going to be running the Trick Room and the Taunt to also taunt other Pokemon that want to go for status moves, or any Pokemon that might want to imprison us out of using the Trick Room. We can afford to taunt with Mimikyu, as we also have the Burning Jealousy, just for a nice spread damage move, but it can also punish some Pokemon that want to set up in front of Mimikyu in order to burn them. And we have the Destiny Bond, which means that we can use Destiny Bond fairly quickly, and hopefully try to take an opposing Pokemon out of the game with the Destiny Bond, because if we're faster than the two Pokemon that are opposing Mimikyu, we can click Destiny Bond to be faster than them, and then if they don't kill Mimikyu in the next turn, we can go for Trick Room, and since Trick Room is negative priority, the Destiny Bond will still be active, which means that if any of those two Pokemon that were previously faster or slower than Mimikyu now become faster than Mimikyu, and if they knock out Mimikyu, that means that they're going to get taken out by the Destiny Bond. And since we're running a lot of stats moves on the Mimikyu, I decided to opt for the Mental Herb so that we can get rid of one Taunt or Encore or any of that jazz. And we're also Terra Grass on Mimikyu, so that way we can be avoiding the Spore, since we are kind of weak to the Spore on Mimikyu. And last but not least, I decided to plot on the Weird Deer, since, I mean, mostly you want to use Indeedee for your normal Psychic type setting up Trick Room, but Weird Deer is kind of nice because it has the Intimidate ability, and so that way we can try and decrease the damage of the opponent just a little bit on their physical attackers, and then we also have the option to go for our dual screens on the Weird Deer with our Light Cry to extend the duration of those screens, and we also have the Psychic Noise just to do a little bit of Psychic type damage, but also stops Pokemon from healing. And lastly, we are Terra Dark on Weird Deer because Dark is resistant to Dark, which is the only thing that we were previously weak to, but it also stops us from getting Prankster taunted if we decide to go with the Dark type on Weird Deer. But yeah, that's the basic gist of the team. Let's get into some battles. Alright, so here we have a pretty generally good team, as they have like the Whimsicott, the Alolan Ninetales for the support, and Incineroar is there for like disruption, and their Luxray could be Guts or it could be Intimidate, both kind of play differently, but not really for us. They decide to lead Whimsicott and Luxray, as we lead Mimikyu and Snorlax, and they decide to taunt into Mimikyu, but Mimikyu immediately heals that with its Mental Herb, and they go for the Supercell Slam, but they miss Snorlax, but they don't have the Guts activated, so I doubt it would have done very much. So we get off the belly drum pretty free here with Snorlax, as Mimikyu gets up the Trick Room, and since Mimikyu doesn't have the Mental Herb anymore, we're kind of being threatened for the Encore by Rampardos, and even if they Encored Snorlax here, it wouldn't be the biggest deal, because we get Rampardos in for free pretty much, but they protect with Luxray, as Whimsicott does go for the Encore, but it doesn't work because Rampardos didn't use a move previously. And now we have 3 whole turns of offensive Trick Room here as they bring in Incineroar to try and lower the attack of our Pokemon, but Snorlax is just going to Body Slam into Incineroar, and we're going to Iron Head into the Whimsicott in order to get a nice double KO here. And double KO means that even if they decide to forfeit here, but even if they decide to protect both Mons this turn, we would still be able to hit both Mons in the next turn of our last turn of Trick Room. Here we have a Mono Dark team, but their Mono Dark team uses a lot of suppressive elements, as they could all very well be running Taunt for our Trick Room here, which is a little nerve-wracking. But we get to lead Mimikyu and Clodsitzer here, as Clodsitzer is our best Pokemon for taking out Dark types, but they immediately lead both of the Ghost types, which means we can't click Aura Sphere into them. And they try to fake out Mimikyu as we taunt Spiritomb, as I didn't want Spiritomb very much, and we just get a free Water Pulse into Sableye here, so good trade for us. We get to taunt into Umbreon and Water Pulse into Spiritomb here. Spiritomb at least has the Foul Play, so it does some damage to Clodsitzer, but the opponent just decides to quit off of us just full-on taunting their Pokemon with Mimikyu pretty much, and Clodsitzer didn't even have to go for the super effective fighting type move here. But I probably would have swapped it out once we got rid of the Spiritomb, depending on what their last Pokemon was. Here we have quite a mix of Mons, as they have like a Vikavolt and Chandelure that you normally don't get to see, but they also have some pretty other good components like the Farigiraf for setting up the Trick Room for Ursaluna, and then the Comfey can come in and heal the Ursaluna, or they could be like set up Annihilate and have Comfey heal the Annihilate once it starts dealing Rage Fist things. So they lead Farigiraf and Annihilate, and we lead Mimikyu and Rampardos, and Rampardos is in a bit of a tricky spot, as I really don't want it to get Drain Punched by the Annihilate.
But they are also in kind of a tricky spot as they have to like attack with Farigiraf or risk us getting up the Trick Room with Mimikyu. But they immediately protect their Farigiraf and they get to U-turn into Mimikyu, which is going to break our disguise. But this does kind of confirm to me, since they're running U-turn, that they are Scarf Annihilate, so if we can get up the Trick Room, it'll be much easier to deal with. But they get to swap Ursaluna in pretty much for free here, as I went for the Taunt into the Annihilate, just in case they wanted to go for a bulk up. Even though Mimikyu would probably still be slower than like most of the Annihilates, it would keep them from bulking up for a while at least. And we Crunch with Rampardos because I thought Crunch would do a lot of damage to Farigiraf, who I kind of wanted off the field. But Ursaluna's going to come in and get its burn turn pretty much for free here. And I figured we might as well sack Mimikyu, so I protect Rampardos here, and I go for the Destiny Bond with Mimikyu, as the Ursaluna goes for the Earthquake, but unfortunately it's not enough to KO Mimikyu. But they do damage their own Comfey, at least, which is kind of nice. And since they're Trick Room Ursaluna, I think that Rampardos has the potential to be faster than the Ursaluna if they're not absolute min speed. But they decide to just hard swap in Farigiraf here, as I went for the Trick Room with Mimikyu so that we could do that strategy where I talked about before, where we click the faster Destiny Bond, and then that remains active for the entire turn because we click Trick Room. And we Iron Head into Comfey, who didn't decide to take on Mimikyu, which also could have been a possibility here if they decided to Dreading Kiss Mimikyu to lose Comfey, and then we would end up Iron Heading Ursaluna for whatever damage that's worth. But Mimikyu gets up the Trick Room here, which means that we get rid of our Destiny Bond, and Rampardos is probably faster than the Ursaluna, which means that we are now slower now that we have the Trick Room set up. So not super great. Farigiraf gets to click Protect, as the Earthquake is going to clear the field from the Ursaluna, but now we get to bring in our back two Mons in the Snorlax and the Closetser, and Snorlax is doing high horsepower for as much damage as it can get, and they just decide to headlong rush into Snorlax, but Snorlax lives it thankfully, and we get to eat our berry on super low health, and the Dark Pulse is going to pick off KO into Ursaluna as the Psychic Noise comes out into Snorlax, but thankfully Snorlax already ate its berry. And I wanted to get rid of the Annihilate here because I read it as the major threat, so we just doubled into that slot after the Terra Dark. And another benefit of going for Terra Dark here was that the Farigiraf now probably cannot hit the Closetser, since it revealed the fact that it was Psychic Noise. So Closetser can just easily Dark Pulse that slot next turn. Here we have very standard Brain Team with Arc, Pelipper, and Basculegion, but they also have the offensive components in the Dragapult, the Kingambit, and the Sneasler, so a lot of offense on this team, so we need to get up the Trick Room in order to have any way to play against this team. So I decided to lead Mimikyu and Reuniclus, thinking that I will double Trick Room, which means that if they decide to double Mimikyu, that means that Reuniclus gets up the Trick Room, but if they decide to hit Reuniclus and then break Mimikyu's sub, that means that Mimikyu gets up the Trick Room, so that's a pretty safe option here, but I didn't end up going for that option. I decided to end up being greedy and going for the Protect on Reuniclus, and they U-turn into Mimikyu, which is going to break the disguise, and then they swap in Pelipper, and then Basculegion goes for the Wave Crash. So definitely not the right turn there. What I think I should have done is I should have gone for the double Trick Room so that Reuniclus could at least get up the Trick Room at the end of the turn here, but Reuniclus gets Toxic Poison, and now we get to bring in the Snorlax, who we protect Snorlax, but they read correctly to Wave Crash into Reuniclus, and that means Basculegion takes a bunch of recoil as Snorlax doesn't catch the Hurricane, and now we get to bring in Closetser, and we Terra Water Snorlax so that Snorlax can live the Wave Crash from the Basculegion, and we eat our berry since we're under half, and we resist the Weather Ball now, which is at least nice, but we Dark Pulse into Basculegion in order to get rid of it, and we Body Slam into Pelipper to not quite two-hit KO it, but now they just get to bring in the Archaludon, who can Electro Shot into either Pokemon and take out the Closetser now, and Hurricane does, enough damage into Snorlax, but we crit the Pelipper here, which might have been necessary. I mean, we saw how much that previous roll did, but we could have low rolled them. But they can bring in Dragapult here to just end the game in order to outrage into Snorlax. So if I had done the initial double Trick Room play where I decided to sack the Mimikyu, or at least guarantee getting up the Trick Room, I think we would have been fine this game because they would have brought in Pelipper, and it depends on the Pokemon that we would have brought in, because we could protect with Snorlax while we use the Psychic with Reuniclus in order to try and KO Basculegion, and then it depends what Pokemon they bring in again. But if we get up the Belly Drum with Snorlax, that means that we can high horsepower the Archaludon, and we can break the Focus Sash on the Pelipper with the Psychic on Reuniclus, but then we get in Closetser for whatever Pokemon dies, and I think Closetser absolutely wraps up the endgame here. Here we have a Weezing Slaking team, but they also have like Volcarona and Grimmsnarl, so they could go for like Quiver Dance, but they also have the Talonflame Garchomp mode where they can just Earthquake into everything. So kind of hard to predict the lead here. I just decided to go with the general lead of Mimikyu and Weirdeer, since Weirdeer could get off the Intimidate unless there's Wheezing on the field, which would stop the Intimidate. And Garchomp shows that it is clear Emulate, but we at least get to Intimidate the Talonflame, which is kind of nice, as Garchomp takes the first turn to protect and Talonflame Tailwinds, but that is perfectly fine for us as we went for the Reflect and get up Trick Room with Weirdeer, and now we can just hard swap in Snorlax, as I'm not too afraid to just start belly drumming Snorlax. And they Terra Steel their Garchomp, probably expecting a Fairy type move from Mimikyu to go into that slot. But I Burning Jealousy with Mimikyu just because I wanted to break the Sash on the Talonflame mostly, but also in case they swapped out Pokemon for something else in the back because we bring in Snorlax. But Garchomp gets up the Sword Stance here, and they actually decided to taunt into what was previously Weirdeer, which means that Snorlax is now taunted and we can't go for a Belly Drum with Snorlax. But Garchomp is going to protect again here, and I reveal the high horsepower on Snorlax as I try to taunt Garchomp here, but the Talonflame decides to taunt back into Mimikyu, but we're Mental Herb, so we ignore it for at least one turn. And now Weezing gets to come in, so it's going to cause all abilities to be ignored, and the high horsepower isn't doing enough to KO it, and the Burning Jealousy chip isn't getting us there either. But now Snorlax is untaunted, but we really need to get rid of Weezing because we're not going to get our berry. So I figured they were going to protect, so I just decided to Body Slam into Talonflame, and Mimikyu's Disguise actually still works while abilities are being turned off, which I did not know at the time, but it is kind of nice, I guess. We're just continuing to do Burning Jealousy chip as Talonflame sets up the Tailwind here, and Snorlax unfortunately gets burned, which means that Weezing is going to live another turn here. And Mimikyu's still taunted, so we can't get our Trick Room back up, but Talonflame takes the Paraturn as we get the Burning Jealousy damage to crit the Talonflame, but I wanted to keep Talonflame on the field for as long as possible so that we can get rid of Weezing without Slaking coming on the field, and now Slaking comes on the field. Just a high horsepower, but we still have our Reflect, so it's not doing too much, but they get the Sludge Bomb damage, and I don't think that crit mattered from the Sludge Bomb, but the high horsepower is finally going to KO Weezing, so abilities are back on, and with them having Slaking on the field, it's much better for us, as Weirdeer gets to Intimidate Slaking to extra take it out of the game at this point, and the last turn of Tailwind is being stalled out by themselves, as Snorlax just wants to go for the high horsepower, but now we get to get up Trick Room with Weirdeer, and we miss the high horsepower, which is a little annoying. It's the Slaking also crits the Snorlax, which would not have gotten rid of it with the attack drop and the Reflect up, but Garchomp just does some spread Earthquake damage, but now we can bring in Closetser, who can lock in the Aura Sphere, since it is super effective against both of the Pokemon that are left, but Psychic Noise from Weirdeer is going to take out the Slaking. Up next we have another Slaking Weezing team, but all of the other pieces are different, as they have the Hisuian Zoroark for a bit of shenanigans, but they also have the Dragonite and Superior can be very offensive with their abilities. The only thing that really benefits from having their abilities turned off on this team is Slaking, so it's kind of crazy to see Weezing here. And Clodsire can also be really slow, so it semi-discourages us from setting up Trick Room, but I think most of our Trick Room mons can deal with the Clodsire since we have so many Psychic types. But they decided to lead Slaking and Superior, and I figured that since they didn't lead Weezing, I thought this was Hisuian Zoroark initially, so I was kind of concerned that if their Superior is faster than their Hisuian Zoroark, that they could just break the substitute on Mimikyu and then Shadow Ball into Mimikyu. But we protect Rampardos here because I thought it was more likely that they would Grass type move into Rampardos, but they decided to break Mimikyu's sub. And Slaking goes for Drain Punch here, proving that it is actually Slaking, so my fears were a little unfounded, just to say the least. But they don't swap in Leasing here, so Slaking is going to take a guaranteed True on turn, as Rock Slide does really good damage to both Pokemon, and I Destiny Bond with Mimikyu in case they decide to attack Mimikyu again, maybe expecting a Terra, but no, they just Leaf Storm into Rampardos in order to take out Rampardos. But now we get in Snorlax, and Body Slam is going to take out the Superior, and we just Burning Jealousy the Snorlax for a bit of damage, as Snorlax unfortunately takes a bit more damage than I would like from the Drain Punch. But now they bring in the Dragonite, who I swap out Closetser to deal with a little bit more. We Body Slam Slaking just to get some chip into it, and the Dragonite reveals that it is not Dragonite, it is actually Hisuian Zoroark. So now we can go Terra Dark on Closetser, and I high horsepower that slot, but we get rid of Slaking this turn just so it cannot move next turn, as the Trick Room is going to come off. And we know which Pokemon is Hisuian Zoroark, and I swap in Mimikyu here, hoping to catch a normal type move on Mimikyu, whether that be like the Hisuian Zoroark going for the Hyper Voice or Hyper Beam, or if it was Dragonite clicking the Extreme Speed into the Snorlax. But they do click the Hyper Voice, so Mimikyu is immune, and Closetser survives, and they go for the Scale Shot into Mimikyu, which Mimikyu is immune to anyways, so we get to Dark Pulse into Zoroark here, and the opponent just decides to quit off of that, seeing as Mimikyu will probably just be able to get up the Trick Room. But even if they decide to Scale Shot into Closetser in order to KO it here, or maybe that would still give them a speed boost, so if we went for the Burning Jealousy with Mimikyu, we could still burn the Dragonite that way, and then bring in Snorlax in order to try and end the game. Lastly, we have a battle against another Garchomp offense team, but they also have more tools for mitigating Trick Room, and the Amoonguss, who can put Pokemon to sleep, and the Furref again, who can just click Imprison Trick Room. So they ended up leading Garchomp and Amoonguss, as I ended up leading Snorlax, and we finally get to see Reuniclus here being useful, as Reuniclus is going to protect on this first turn, and they do Spore into Reuniclus, which is a little crazy because Reuniclus can be Overcoat, but I mean the Protect saves us here, so we don't have to worry about the Overcoat. And Snorlax gets up the Belly Drum here, which is going to make it the prime target next turn, as Reuniclus gets off the Poison on itself, but Amoonguss decides to protect this turn as the Garchomp goes for Earthquake, and Snorlax protects it, and Reuniclus takes it, so now we get up the Trick Room, and we Body Slam into Amoonguss in order to take that out in one turn, and we're going to trick away whatever Garchomp item the Garchomp has, and we get the Clear Amulet off of Garchomp, which doesn't really change anything, but now the Garchomp is poisoned, and that's pretty neat. But now we can bring in our back two mons, which are Closetser and Rampardos, and I decide to lock Closetser into Dragon Pulse in order to take out Garchomp, and now it is Volcarona and Farigiraf here at the end, and we Terra Dark Closetser for mostly because I thought the Volcarona might go for the Terra Grass here to try and get a Giga Drain after a living and attack, but decided not to Terrestrialize. They Terrestrialize the Farigiraf instead. So Rampardos' Rock Slide is just going to take out Volcarona in one hit, and the Dragon Pulse from the Closetser is going to finish off the rest of the damage. So yeah, that was the Pokemon that tend to get picked last for Trick Room team. I mean, the reason that you would pick these Pokemon last for Trick Room is that they're very high risk, high reward in their playstyles. As we saw in that one game, like if we don't get out Trick Room, we pretty much just lose. And that's why we have 3 different Trick Room Pokemon on this team in order to help guarantee that. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video, and even consider subscribing, because both of those things help me out an absolute ton, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.